Okay, we are Masters Radio, an online music community finding ways to enjoy and support the master artists who created the soundtracks to our lives. We guarantee that musicians on our platform will benefit from increased exposure, engagement, healthcare, and other benefits, fundraising, and growth opportunities that empower them to thrive. And we are very fortunate to have Steve Lynch of Autograph and a number of other pursuits, and a great guitarist and teacher, a world recognized guitarist and teacher. Steve, welcome to Masters Radio. It's a true honor to have you join us. Looking
It's
back on, we're speaking before we started the tape of how long you've been doing this, and your book makes it really clear that you've got a lot of time in this. And
yeah.
in this incredible journey of yours, what are some of the moments that stand out to you?
Well, probably the Van Halen tour. One of the biggest things is probably I'll kind of start chromatic or in chronological format. Seeing the early bands, like I saw Hendrix twice, I saw the Stones twice in the early days, and all these different bands. I remember Jethro Tull and all that, and then when I was playing professionally in Seattle from 1973 actually, but then when I went to the Guitar Institute of Technology in 1978, so that was a huge change in my life. And then also when we got the Van Halen tour, and then when we got signed to RCA Records, and we were on early MTV and God, the American Bandstand, so and then opening up my music school, doing clinics all over the world, and of course before that touring with Motley Crue and Bryan Adams, White Snake and Aerosmith and Heart and everything. All those were just amazing times. And then more recently, I got my guitar, and Randy ran the bass player's bass into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and so that was, so it's just been, there's not one big thing that stands out. There's several, and so I'm very fortunate that way.
Very good. Well, one of the things that is unique, pretty much uniquely yours, and that you literally wrote a book on it, is your two-handed tapping technique. So you mentioned about Guitar Institute technology, and from a perspective of a teacher, what is that like to be able to share that with the world?
The first thing that I thought of when I started playing the technique around probably 1975, when I saw Harvey Mandel. He's an old guy that used to play with John Mayall and the Blues Breakers. Then there was another guy in Seattle named Steve Buffington that used to tap around with it. And so he showed me a couple of things, and I got a couple of ideas from Harvey Mandel. And then when I went to the Guitar Institute, it was Emmett Chapman, that the inventor of the Chapman stick that you play with both hands. Well, he was talking about, like how he got so far with just guitar that he had to come up with this instrument to accompany himself. And so he showed me a couple of ideas, like here's a one position of an A minor pentatonic scale. Well, up here you can play another position of the scale. And he just showed me that. And then this was in the beginning of the school year at the Guitar Institute. This was March of 1978. And so I took everything that I was writing down. I came up with these little things where it was a guitar neck, and what I did was I wrote down all the different shapes that I was learning, all the scales, all of the the arpeggios, triads, chord inversions, all those kind of things. I wrote them down two-handed, so I would see what it looked like on the neck, and I'd be able to look at it, and I'd just be able to play it. And so I kept on writing these things down until the end of the year. I had a stack of papers like that I had written down all these different things. And then when I performed at the graduation ceremony, there was Howard Roberts, who wrote the curriculum for the school and for the Guitar Institute. And there was also Tommy Tedesco, who's the #1 studio guy in LA from the 1950s, 60s, and into the 70s too. And so they approached me after I performed at the graduation ceremony, and they said, "You should write a book about that. We got to publish it." I said, "God, guys, I got enough for 3 or 4 books easily right now." And so the next day they went in, and I met their publisher, Dale Zdenek, and within 10 minutes I had a publishing deal. And so that was my book called Right Touch, and then there was Right Touch Books 2 and Books 3. And a lot of my clinics that I did later on, I taught out of those books. And so it was just a really really remarkable experience, going there. And it, like I said, it changed my whole life, my whole perspective of music and everything, so.
Yeah, it's a cool way to provide. I mean, you're working the art in two different directions, probably more really. When we'll go a little bit literary in a bit, but the music, it's of course, turn up the radio
Yeah.
is anthemic. I play in a cover band. We do it. It's
All right. That's great. I love to hear
as soon as
that.
you begin.
Yeah.
It's the first few seconds of it. Everybody knows what it's going to be because of what.
Right. It's that beat. It just kind of pulls you in that tone.
Exactly. And I heard the story of RCA being inevitably what RCA was.
Yeah.
Saying, we want a different single, and you guys,
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they wanted to put out Send Her to Me as the first single, which is a great song, but hey, this is called Turn Up the Radio, and so we argued with them about it, and then we went in and we did all these call letters, for all the radio stations, all the K's on the west and all the W's on the east. And we went in and said, turn it up, KWSE, and then we went through all of them. It took us 2 8-hour days to do all of them, but they were all the P1 stations throughout the whole United States and Canada. And they absolutely loved it because it was turn up the radio and they were radio DJs. And so we tried to explain this to RC and they finally got it, and then when we did that, the call letters, then it skyrocketed, So.
Yeah. What we're 50 years? No, not quite 50 years. We're just past the anniversary of MTV kicking off very first.
Yeah, I think that was what, 81, 82?
Radio Star. And we're beginning to see the 80s winding radio down, or at least turning into eventually what it is today.
Right, exactly. Yeah. So
but so I could see that you guys were like, no, radio's there.
Yeah, right, exactly. Yeah. But obviously it worked out very well, and I'm glad we stuck to our guns on that. So another issue that we had, a lot of people don't know about, is that when that song came out, Coca-Cola came after us because we said things go better with rock, and they were saying no, things go better with Coke. That's our thing, and we said no, it's not. And it went to court, and we won against Coca-Cola, which was a huge deal, So
if you said they've got a case, but you didn't say Coke. Things go better with a lot of things.
Right. Yeah. But they thought they had a handle on that, and it ends up that they didn't, So that's just one of those little quirks in there that not many people know about.
Brilliant. You talked earlier about gathering the content for your Right Touch books. From what I've seen and read through the book so far, you did kind of the same thing for Confessions, which, by the way, the book is called Confessions of a Rock Guitarist. It is, right? I believe it is actually out. Is it not?
Yeah, well, it comes out May 20th. Yeah, and people can get it on. They can buy it now. The pre-release is already. You can get it now, but it comes out May 20th, and which is that's like next week. Well, it's like 8 days away. Today's the 12th. Yeah. So anyway, but what you can do is you can just go to Amazon.com, you can go to BarnesandNoble.com, or you can go to Bookshop.com and Bookshop, and you can purchase it there, and it'll be shipped out on the 20th. So yeah,
excellent. So we'll put the links to those all in the show notes.
Great. Okay.
What I read about it was that you'd basically been writing down little 1-sentence snippets of your life.
Yeah. Right. Well, basically, throughout my whole life, there was all these incidents happened, and so I was telling my friends, relatives, and fans about all these different things that had happened. And everybody always said, God, you gotta write a book about your life, you just got to. And so what I did was I started writing down this was like maybe 10, 12 years ago. I started writing down 1-sentence reminders of all these stories. And before I knew it, I had like 200. And then I was so busy, I never knew when I would have the chance, to actually write the book. But then COVID hit. And so I wasn't able to tour. I wasn't able to teach. I wasn't able to really do anything. So I was stuck at home, and I thought, this is the time I start putting together the book. So the whole time during COVID, that's what I did, was I wrote the book. So by the time COVID ended, thankfully, then I had the whole book written. Of course, a lot happened after that, like with the whole Rock and Roll, Hall of Fame thing, my whole engagement and all that, and so it was one of those things where I just thought, I'm glad that it was postponed because they were backed up. Of course, the publishing company, they were backed up because they pretty much shut down for a couple of years. They couldn't do anything. And but it's okay. It worked out for the best, and I think now that all these different things that happened are over, then I can kind of look back at it and go, God, my God, it's a good thing it was postponed a few different times, from its original release time. So it worked out well.
It's certainly worth the wait. It is amazing.
Thank you. Thank
from
you.
what I have read of it, you're a rock and roll renaissance man. You've just been through it from only you. The rock and roll part of Renaissance Man is it starts with the story of a guy in a tent, over a wood fire, but the only electricity he has is so he can play his guitar.
Yeah. Well, I had an extension cable running out from my friend's house, and I was in the middle of a field that was blackberry bushes. And see, my dad kicked me out because I wasn't going to go to school when I was 15. Hendrix died, and I just went, I'm just going to play guitar for a living. And he wasn't that upset about it. He got pulled out of school in the 8th grade to work on the big thing. Lived in North Dakota, and that's where I was born. Actually, is in North Dakota. We moved to Seattle when I was 1, but his family pulled him out of school to work on the farm there, in the 8th grade. And then the same thing happened to my mom. She was pulled out of school in the 8th grade because her stepmom ran a big daycare center and she needed help with that. And so my dad said, you can go ahead and do what you want, but I'm not going to support you if you're not going to school, And I said, okay, and, fair enough. And so I asked him, I said, can I have that tent, or can I use that tent? That we used to use for camping. And he says, you can have that old thing, And so I got it. I cleared out the blackberry bushes out in the middle of this field, running an extension cord out there. So I had a heater, a lamp, and an amplifier, and my guitar, and a little cot, sleeping bag. And I was happy as could be. It was complete freedom, at 15 years old. And I could practice as much as I wanted, and that's what I did. I sat in that tent and practiced. And that was it. That was my life, basically. And I was working for $1.25 an hour. I was working at a stereo shop, building speaker cabinets, for PA systems and for clubs and everything. And so that was a great experience, learning how to wire crossovers and everything. So I thought, what a great job for a musician, And so, I worked there for a few years, and that was great. And then I started playing professionally and when I was 18 in 1973. And that was it. It just continued on from that point. So
yeah, it's speaking of great jobs for a musician. I'm employee number 37 from Guitar Center.
All right.
Emmett Chapman. He was demoing the stick for us at one point.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Isn't that amazing? That's an amazing instrument. And he was such a cool guy. He was like the little nutty professor. You know what I mean? I mean, once you see him, he's got that kind of a goatee, and then he's got those little wire rim glasses and everything. And you see him, and you go, that guy looks like, an inventor.
Yeah.
He looks like an inventor, and that's what he was, So.
Yeah, true. So, and then, so you have this living in a tent with, borrowed electricity, all the way up to partying like rock stars, everything that makes that cliche valid with
right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. It was first, Van Halen. That's when we got the record deal, was with the tour with Van Halen. We actually signed with RCA backstage at Madison Square Gardens. Okay. But then with Motley Crue, yeah, I don't remember much of that tour. It was like one of those where I'm going, okay, and then after that, it was actually, I think, December of '86, somewhere around there. And I just said, that's it. I'm done. I'm done with the party. And so I quit everything. I quit drinking and I quit everything else. I just like, that's okay. Party's over, and that was a really big turning point too. It's not like I was always like that. I was always into really practicing and taking my craft seriously. It was just that tour that was way over the top. So,
and it shows. Obviously your playing is fantastic. The stuff.
Thank you.
23 is quite good. The Blue Neptune thing underway, done. What's going on with that?
That I had to put on hold because of all this, and then we're also working out an agreement thing with Sony right now for the three RCA albums to go back to us. It would be, so that we can release them, or so that Sony can release them, but we'll basically own them, so that's one of the things. So I've got that going on, and that's coming near to a close right now. And so then, of course, my book, getting everything prepped. I did my book I did a hybrid deal. So it's not one of those regular deals where once you give the manuscript in, you lose control of it. I didn't want that, and so what I did was I signed a deal where basically I have to do everything, all the promo, the public relations and press release and all these kind of things. I have to get all that stuff together myself, basically, and I had to do basically all the editing. They gave me hints here and there, but I wanted to keep it in my own voice. It's the way I speak, and it's the way that I like to explain things. But if I would have done the deal like my agent at that time, she wanted me to sign with Simon and Schuster, and she said, but you got to know that you're going to lose control of the dialogue, and you're also going to lose control of what the cover looks like and everything. And I said, absolutely not. I could have signed with the biggest one in the world, but the great thing about who I signed with, which was Indigo River Publishing, they have Simon and Schuster distributing it anyway. They're the distribution company, but I didn't have to give up any of my rights as far as the dialogue and as far as the artwork. So it worked out well. But just to answer your question further, is that I was so busy, I didn't have time to actually do the whole Network 23 thing. And I figured this will go on through the rest of this year, because I'm going to be doing, promotional tours and all that kind of stuff. And a lot of podcasts like this special one right here. And so, I'm going to be pretty busy. And so I look at it like the music will come later. I'm not going anywhere. So
that's right. Yeah. So a youthful 70 years old, and
yeah.
So
I look at it like I don't feel that age at all. I don't. I went to the doctor, complete clean bill of health. They say just everything's just like you're like a healthy man in his mid-50s. So
that's fantastic. Very good. Yeah. I understand part of that was you moving out of your beloved Seattle where you got started. Back now I'm not gonna say where you are, but you're someplace where you're less prone to allergies and the like. So
right. So I moved to LA in 78. So I was basically down down there for like 14, 15 years. Then I moved to Florida for 5 years. I lived around the Fort Lauderdale area. And then my dad was getting ill, so I moved back up to Seattle, and I thought, it's like I can teach up there, because the touring was over at that point, and so I did. I moved back up there in 97, and so then I ended up staying there because of the fact that I had like so many students. I had like the first month I was there, I had 40 students, and then I opened up a music school, and then by that time I had 70 students, and I had 12 teachers working for me, and it was called the Federal Way School of Music, south of Seattle, and it's still going, so that's it. But I had to leave Seattle because of the fact I'm allergic to the black molds up there, so I was sick all the time. And plus the students were coming in sick. In Seattle, if you're sick, it's just another day, because of the weather up there, so they just act like, oh yeah, I'm sick, no big deal. But when I had breathing problems before, so my pulmonologist said, Steve, you're going to have to leave Seattle. You're not going to survive if you stay here, and that scared me. And so 30 days later, I had my house sold, and I had my truck. I had a truck, a big Ryder truck packed up, and my car towing behind it, and I was driving to Florida, somewhere in Florida. I didn't even know where. Yeah. And I was just going by myself, and but that's, I've kind of done that my whole life, where I just just like when I moved to LA, back in 78, I just kind of winged it. I had $200 in my pocket, and a mattress, and a Marshall half stack, and a Les Paul and a Stratocaster. and that was it, in a little suitcase, with clothes. And I went down there and I survived. I made it. I went through the Guitar Institute of Technology and I made it. But sometimes it's just like that. That saying, it's like a wing and a prayer. You just go and you just do it. And you force yourself into these situations, and if you really concentrate on what you're doing and keep focused, and you end up coming out on top with the other. So.
Absolutely. So I wonder, when you were back with your dad, if he appreciated the irony of you not going to school but building one.
Yeah, and it was so surprising. It was like, the first time they saw me play, was at the Tacoma Dome. Tacoma's a city just south of Seattle.
Yeah.
And we played there with a Motley Crue. And so here I'm at this big arena, and there's my dad's out in the audience, with this bald head. Luckily, I got my mom's hair, but
yeah, right.
But I see my dad's bald head out there. He's in the mosh pit, and I'm pointing at him, laughing, and he's going, like, he's pumping his fist, and I'm just going, that's so cool,
Yep.
And then I had to go up. I think it was like a year later. I had to go up and film the Two-Handed Guitarist with REH Videos. And so I flew back up to Seattle, and I was still living in LA at the time. And so then I stayed at my dad's place, and I walked in, and he put me in this back room, where it used to be the rec room in the house, and so I went in, and there was these gold albums that I sent to him, and there was this, all these newspaper clippings and different awards and stuff. And I'm going, how in the hell did he get all this? But it affected me so deeply because I had no idea, and I literally broke down and started crying right there on the floor, because I'm just going, my God, this is just like the epitome of making this, when your dad is super proud of you, but he's not the vocal person. He never said anything, that way, and I just went, wow, this is huge. That was such an epic point in my life.
Yeah. That generation doesn't surprise me at all that he's closed mouth about that, but open-hearted.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Right.
That's cool. It had to be a very rewarding experience for you. You did a little on the emotional intelligence side and developing meditations, philosophies, and the like, while you were getting yourself clean. And then, and I imagine it has continued. And that's another reason why I call you kind of a rock and roll Renaissance man.
Yeah.
Tell me how that has impacted. Obviously, that's the book that talks about it, but the music. To what extent is that impacting how you either make music yourself or how you help others make it?
Well, one of the things that I always did, and that's because I got into spirituality and all that before, back in the 70s, actually. And so, Seattle's kind of like a hippie town, but it's a very, very intelligent people there. I mean, it's one of the smartest cities in the whole world, because you look at, everything comes from there. I mean, it's Microsoft, Nintendo, real-time networks. Just the list just goes on and on and on and on and on.
Yep.
That's just the way Seattle is, but I got into it then, but what I realized later on, like when I really started to take solos seriously, like that's when I went into our first album with RCA. I really looked at it like, I've got to pour everything into this. And so I reached deep down inside of myself, and I really wanted to pull out every possible thing that I could from my emotions and put them into these solos. And so every time I did a solo, I crafted that solo for the song in particular. I prided myself on not repeating licks. There's licks that sound similar in a lot of my stuff, but I didn't copy them. I always wrote the solo for that particular song, and so I'm really glad that I did it that way. And it affected my writing too. And especially the writing that I did, like later on with my solo album, Network 23. And that's all over YouTube. People can go listen to that, I'm going to be re-releasing that as well. But it's the whole spiritual journey, that has elevated me and made me realize, that's what the whole drug thing, after an alcohol thing, when that was all over, I just decided, I'm going to get back into the whole spiritual thing, and it really boosted, my confidence in myself, and the way I thought, about teaching, about playing, just everything. It affected my life tremendously. And then when I was out doing the clinics, I did 325 clinics in 20 different countries. What I did was I had a stack of, papers, 34 pages that everybody got, and so we go through it. I had interpreters and everything in all these different countries. And the main thing that they really liked is on the last page, I had all these different books written out, or written, the title and the author, and so they could look at those, and they were really great books that I've read. As you can see, I still have them back here, and so they really appreciated that because it changed a lot of people's lives, all these young students, and it made them look at things differently, more in a positive way. And also, I used to talk about, the competitiveness. You don't be competitive. This is a part of you that you're sharing that has nothing. Music is not a sport. Okay. It's not a competition. What you have to do is you have to create something that's from inside you. And this is the way it's done. And so they really latched onto that. And I told them, look, it doesn't matter how fast you play. I mean, that's great. You want to be as proficient as you can and have your theory on the guitar. Of course you want to have those things. But the main thing is just being able to play from whatever you're feeling inside, and I think that had more of an impact on them, all the students that I had, than anything, really.
It's easy to believe that. A lot of people are focused upon the hands and the ears when
Right.
learning an instrument, and they forget about the brain part.
Right, and the heart part.
And the heart part, precisely.
Yes.
Yep.
And so I think it really had a big impact on these people because, when I got back from doing the last round of clinics, and I went back to LA, St. Louis Music called me up and they said, man, we've got boxes of mail for you. I said, what? And so they sent it to me because I was doing the clinics for them. Plus I was promoting the books. It was for Ampeg and great amplifiers and Alvarez and West Tone guitars and all that. And so, so I was doing the clinics in conjunction with all of that. And so when they sent these boxes to me of all these letters, I opened them up and I was reading them. I just sat on the floor for a couple of days, just reading them. And most of it was all about those books that I was talking about, how it changed their lives for the better and it gave them new focus, and I thought that is so cool. So I helped them in a positive way, to navigate through their lives, and I thought that's really great. I'm really glad that I had that opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the older you get, the more I think the notion of, and you said it before, this is a community, it's not a competition. Helping others come up the path is very useful. So being as you have, and I ask this of all the artists, because we have a unique community of artists in that they're all, well, let's just say a little long in the tooth. And so I could ask them, what's different that new artists should look to get successful? The record labels aren't going to help them the way they may have helped you. They may have hurt you in some cases back then. But what would you say to a new musician just getting started to try to achieve what you guys have achieved, what you've achieved?
Well, what I'd say concentrate on your writing. Of course, like I said, you want to be a very proficient guitarist or whatever instrument you play. You want to become very proficient and very knowledgeable on that instrument so you can communicate with others, and you set your sights high, okay? And what you do is you write, no matter what you have to do, whether it's a walk through the snow in the winter, through the woods or whatever needs to inspire you, then use that experience to inspire you to write words, to come up with different parts that you might play on guitar. The one thing you definitely don't want to do is copy somebody else, anybody in particular. When I grew up, I was listening to, it was Hendrix, it was Jeff Beck, it was David Gilmour, it was Jimmy Page. And so I got a little bit from all these different guys, and including Harvey Mandel, who I mentioned earlier. And so it was a combination of all these different people. But then you have to come up with something that's your own. And what grabs me with guitar players now is when I hear them play something that's completely original. Because all these guys, they can come out and they can play, all these different things that are, super fast or sweeping arpeggios and all that. And I thought, okay, but where's the feel? Where is the feel? I want to hear that slowly bent note like David Gilmour or Jeff Beck does. And the vibrato that comes in afterwards, really just a nice vibrato. That to me is what that made me want to become a guitar player, was hearing that. You know what I mean? Those bends and that vibrato and sliding and all the different phrasing techniques. You know, it wasn't about speed or anything. It was just about, you know, writing really cool stuff. And if you listen back to the solos, you know, back in the 60s and especially the 70s, you go, God, these guys, this solo is written for this song. You know, like anything David Gilmour wrote, he wrote that solo because he's following the chords. He's playing the triads and incorporating them into his solos and everything. And he's go, I just thought, you know what? This is the type of player I want to be. I want to really pay attention to what's going on. So what I would do is I would bring, you know, like a boombox into rehearsal while we were writing. And, you know, we'd have the song, we'd decide where the solo was. And sometimes I would just play over maybe a chorus section, or usually I put in a bridge, you know, I'd want it to go to modulate to another key or whatever, just like I did with Turn Up the Radio. Instead of being in G, I moved it up to A. And so I just started messing around with a Mixolydian mode. And, you know, it took me 5-8 hour days to come up with that solo. I went, that's it. But, you know, it's that creative, you know, that creative force, you know, that you use and to really bring something forth to the people that where it's in that song and everybody knows that song, everybody knows that solo. When I used to listen to David Gilmour, look at David Gilmour is hugely popular today. You see all these different solos being played by him and people are learning them and learning, you know, you have so many videos of just inundated with all these younger kids playing these, David Gilmour solos from, especially from Dark Side of the Moon and Wish You Were Here. And I just go, God, that's so cool that they're listening to that. That was my bowl of Cheerios back in the day. You know what I mean? And so it's really cool to see that again. And
that the solos can stand alone.
Right. Exactly. Yeah. You hear the solo and you know exactly what song it is. That is a good solo. And you know what I mean?
Indeed. Yeah. And it's an old thing. You mentioned all these guys, Jimmy, Jeff, these guys, they themselves drew from the older guitar players before them, who were mostly blacks and weren't get any play in America. And so it seemed new to us, but they learned all that too. And people like Bert Parker, who was a saxophone player, you know, so he would play like the singer of the song. He would do a vocal line on a saxophone, and that has carried on. You hear what Gilmour does a solo in Pink Floyd or alone. Oftentimes it sounds a lot like no, there's no way out of here from his first solo album. That guitar solo just completely mimics the vocal line.
Exactly. That's what I was talking about as far as what I would do is I'd take that boombox and I didn't finish that part of the story, was I would record up until the point, you know, I would say, okay, guys, let's play a few bars before my solo section comes in with people singing. And then just, you know, the part where my solo is going to be, of course, I just said, keep playing. And I would drop out. Okay. I just wouldn't play during that section. And then they'd come back in with the vocals. Usually it would be into a bridge or into the outro chorus or something. And so what I would do is I'd listen to that. I'd bring it home and I'd listen to that section, you know, on cassette tape over and over and over again without a guitar in my hands. Okay, I put the guitar in the corner and I just go, okay, I'm going to come up with a solo here and from here. And I'm not even going to pick up the guitar. And then I'd start hearing things like I'd go, oh, this sounds like a cool beginning into this, because I'd be listening to the vocals and I'd be carrying something from the vocal right into the beginning of the solo. So it really complemented it, you see. And so then I would go, okay, now I got this part. I'm going to keep that. That's really cool. And then I would listen to it again and again, keeping in mind what I just heard and what I decided was going to be the intro to the solo. And then I would hear these other parts going. Each time I would just figure them out. And sometimes it would take me days and days, just like I mentioned with Turn Up the Radio, to come up with something that really fit the song. But that's why I did it. I did it without a guitar in my hands. And so
that's cool. Well,
and it works.
Made me feel a little better about a time in my life when I spent 4 hours working on a harmonica solo that was about, I think, 20 seconds long. Right. Hear you say three 8-hour days to work on Turn Up the Radio. Okay, I feel a lot
5 8-hour days. Yeah. So, man,
that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So
because
Go ahead.
Because I knew, especially with that song, it was going to be something special, turn up the radio and everything. So I wanted, to kind of not only have a solo that really fit it, but also kind of leave my footprint. Like, here's my technique. Here's the way I think. It's different from a lot of the guitar players at the time because they weren't thinking of modes. They were usually playing pentatonic solos, blues-based pentatonic solos and everything.
Yeah.
And so I said, I don't want that. I don't want to do that. I want to play something that's that fits each chord that's going by. And so that's what I did. Sliding up to on the first one is sliding up to the fourth, then down to the major third, then sliding up to the root, and then down to the minor seventh. Climbing up the scale like that, just those four notes. And then going into, the rest of it where it's just incorporating the chords, notes of the chords that are going by, and passing tones. That was it. So,
yeah,
and then the hammer on part at the end,
right.
That's just the triads for each different chord that's going by, and having that knowledge and then being able to incorporate that rather than just winging a pentatonic solo, that's one thing I just did not want to do. And so, that's why I really took my time in incorporating these different ingredients into the songs to make them sound different, you know what I mean? So
yeah, I do. You made a dent. We had Mark Villalenga on from Nothing More, and he plays those 8-string Aristides guitar.
Yeah.
He's got something
amazing,
like 12 alternate tunings.
Yeah,
right. He's one of those technicians. He's getting to it, but but the songs all have a melodic solo to them that sounds very much like they've clearly listened to the vocal line. They're singing the song with their guitar.
Right, exactly.
And it's been singing the song with your instrument since the first time they were able to record them back in the 30s. It's the same thing.
Exactly. Yeah. You know exactly what I'm talking about. And so, and that's the thing. And that's what I kind of started to really miss was, the solo would come up and it'd be, these guys getting really technical and everything, but it would just be, what does that have to do with the song itself? And some of my favorite solos are just melodies. Because it just, really simple stuff, like even like somebody like Chris Isaacs or something like that, the guitar player that was playing with him, and just simple stuff, or Elliot Easton from the Cars, and I listen to stuff and I go, God, that's really cool what he put together right there, which most all of it was like major pentatonic stuff, but he would, in fact, most of their songs were in major keys. So, he would play out of these major pentatonics and throw these different things in. And I go, this guy knows what he's doing. I can listen to a guitar player and I know that when they know their theory, you know what I mean? Right off. It shows, oh, this guy knows his theory. So,
and sometimes it surprises you. Listen to the end of what song is it? It's Crisscross. And it's one of his 2 hits. If you listen to the very end, the guitar playing on it, you think, my God, this guy's good. If you think you're thinking David Gilmour, Martin Knopfler, you're all very melodic, obviously incredibly fast if they want to be, but they know that it's not all about speed. It's about
It was complete taste. It was all about taste. And again, like Christopher Cross, he obviously knew his theory very well. And what he played, I'm just going, God, this guy's really good, and the way that he's, executing his solo is just like, well, there's a lot of feel in it and everything. And so I know exactly, I can't think of the name of the song in particular right now, but I know what you're talking about. And when I first heard it, I went, oh, wow, this is really good. And that's the way I kind of look at guitar players. When they come up with a solo that's really unique or just using a completely different sound, you can hear several guitar players and you can't distinguish between them. It's all basically really close to the same exact sound, and it's the same scales, basically played really fast, and picking all the notes and everything. And I go, one of the last guys I listened to, and this was the last person that I ever listened to as far as influencing me, and that was Alan Holsworth. He just had this melodic sense where he would just erupt into something and then he would stop and then he would start playing again, but there would be that dead air. And I like that. And Jeff Beck would be talking about that. He'd say, breathe, let it breathe a little bit, And so Jeff Beck, this the later stuff that he did on his solo records, where he was using the slide up above the pickups and everything, and just go, oh my God, it melts your heart, but he was incorporating all these different sounds and being, he just kept on reinventing himself. And I just loved him so much for that, just because every time you heard him do something, he was doing something, that he completely added on, and that at one point he just never used a pick again. He decided, I'm not going to use a pick anymore. I'm just going to do fingers, and I thought, wow, that takes big kahunas to do that. You know what I mean?
A lot of them say it slows them down,
Yeah,
so
absolutely,
it gets in the way of their, I shouldn't say slow them down because it implies they want to be faster or they don't, but it
Right.
gets in the way, right? Not very
Right,
famous for
exactly.
that. Yeah, he does.
But I think you probably know what Alan Holmes. See, it was early Alan Holdsworth that I was listening to. It was off the UK album with Tony Levin and Bill Bruford and all that.
Yes.
And then I was also listening to Jean-Luc Ponty's Enigmatic Ocean. Those two albums were out in 1978. That's when I was going to the Guitar Institute. And I was racking my brain trying to learn his stuff. And I ended up doing some of those licks two-handed. And then I later found out he's just got the stretch of an octopus, so he was playing a lot of that stuff just left-handed, doing hammer-ons and pull-offs, but I was figuring it out two-handed,
Right.
And so, but it was just his melodic sense, just coming in with this. Where did this thing come from? Where he comes in with the whammy bar, and he bends up to the note, and then he exaggerates it and goes a little above pitch, and you just go, oh, it's what I call chiropractic playing. Where you
because it hurts.
It's
right?
kind of go, oh man, my back's out. Oh, that's better,
Yeah.
And they go back and pitch again.
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, so.
Very good. Well, you've gotten quite an education on guitar in this as well. What if you had anything to say to your fans that we haven't talked about yet? What would it be?
It would be listen to things that make you feel good. Just always listen to the music that really stirs you, and makes you feel good about your life and everything. It's all about the good times. Life is an experience, and so it's a learning experience. We're all evolving right now. And so this is very good. This is spiritual evolution. That's what life and embodiment is about. Okay. And so that's the way I look at it. And so I just say, listen to things and surround yourself with positive people. That's a huge thing. There's this author, the scientist actually, his name is Masaru Emoto. He wrote a book, his initial book was The Hidden Messages in Water. And what it is how words and thoughts and music affects water. One of the first experiments he did was he took 3 glasses of water and he put them on a table in a New York subway. And he asked people while they came up, he said, okay, on this first glass of water, I want you to think of something that really makes you mad. Really, just something that happened today, or just someone, a relationship that you have that really makes you angry, And they just said, think about that while you're looking at this glass of water. Okay, now on this next glass of water, he said, think of something that, like somebody you really love, or a great, experience that you had. Really think about that, and while you're looking at this glass of water. On the third one, he just said, okay, really kind of just empty your mind. Don't really think about anything. Okay, what they would do is they'd freeze this water, and they would take photographs under microscopic exposures, and what they would do was they would find the first glass, with the hatred and everything, that would be black and orange and red. There was no crystalline structures whatsoever. On the next one, where people have these positive thoughts, it was all these beautiful crystal structures, and then on the third one, it had crystalline structures, but it wasn't like it wasn't as vivid as the one where you're thinking really positive, And so they did this all over the world with just thought. Then they started using words, and it had the same effect, because there's, when you say, I hate you, well, then they say that to one where it's always black and orange and red. Okay. So then they did it, think of something or say something really nice. I love you, whatever it may be on this other glass, They did this all over the world. And again, and it turned out the same results. Then they did it with music. They started playing just like pop stuff and everything, and
Yeah.
stuff that was fun, good rock and roll stuff. And it had crystalline structures in it, and then they played classical music, or new age music or something like that, something with a really positive influence in the music itself. Okay, and then on the third one, what they would do is they would play heavy metal or rap with a really negative connotation with it. And it was all black and orange and red. I thought to myself, human beings are 70% water. How's the music and words and thoughts affect you? So I started thinking I've got to think about what I think, about what I say, and the music I listen to, and the music I put out there. And it changed everything. And so unfortunately, he passed away recently, but he put out a few more books after that. But you can Google it, and you can look up The Hidden Messages in Water, and he's got pictures all throughout the books where you can see, the different results. And he opened up this whole thing, and that's why I'm kind of a nerd this way. But in fact, I have the book right here.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So, but
we've been using the term Renaissance man. Let's stick with that. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I'll go along with that.
Yeah. Okay. So it has been a treat. Now, what we haven't spoke of is what's next.
What's next is
get the book tour. Obviously, you got to do that. But after that,
got to do the book tour and promote that and everything. And then, like you said, I might do a new version of Autograph after the first of the year. I haven't decided yet because I have all these new song ideas that really don't pertain to the 80s. But then I have other songs that are definitely, in that genre again. So I'm kind of looking at maybe I'll do both. I don't know. It depends on how much time I have. But the main thing is I just want to record. And what I want to do is record just whatever I feel. My favorite album of all time is Dark Side of the Moon. And I've listened to it so many times with headphones and listening to the panning and the effects that they put on it and everything. It's magic. I mean, that album is absolute magic, and just the way everything is put together on the different effects that they use, the clocks, people talking in the background, having different singers and saxophones come in. And it was just like, wow, it was a group of ingredients that work together perfectly. And I want to do something that is just whatever I feel. I'm not going to think about radio play. I'm not going to think about even it being in a particular song format, like the standard, thing where it's like intro, verse, pre-chorus, chorus, and repeat, and then put out in the outro, I don't want to do anything like that, so, it's just going to be whatever, excuse me, whatever I feel inside. And that's it.
Cool. Well, you talk about a year. Your inspiration comes in a year. When you had Dark Side of the Moon, you had Pet Sounds, you had Sgt. Pepper's, you had all these albums that were really pushing the envelope of what you could do recording wise, and of course, very little of it ever translated well live.
Yeah,
but,
and those are great examples. Those are great examples. Same thing with the White Album too, and so it was all these different things, and there was different groups too. I mean, you look at Emerson, Lake and Palmer, you look at Supertramp. Remember Supertramp?
Of course.
And it's just all these groups that were kind of like on the cutting edge of being progressive, but still snuck in under the radar to get radio play. When realistically you listen to them and they're just incredible musicians, and they can basically write whatever they want, but they just wanted to write what they felt and they put it out there. And just like with like Pink Floyd we were talking about, they ran their songs together so they couldn't even be played as singles, and then Money, of course, was the biggest hit off of that album. But the rest, and then the rest of them, everybody caught on. But and Led Zeppelin did this too on the first album. They said they just play the whole album, And so FM back then, back in the late '60s, it was still pretty new. It was AM radio before that, and so FM started to take over, and then they became mainstream all the way. They started broadcasting in stereo. So this goes way back. I'm an old guy.
You are, yep. I said you got a few years on me, but it's and one of the things about Turn Up the Radio that I remember at the time was it's a long song.
Yeah,
relatively speaking, and radio is kind of like
5.
We wanted 3 minutes and 30 seconds or less, and they're sort of like, it's such a wonderful song about the radio, but it's too long.
Right,
A
right.
lot of people
Exactly.
sort of
Yeah.
arguing about whether to play it or not. Yeah, you know, it's well, you know, I'd love to hear that stuff. And to your point about you've got some '80s stuff. The last band we had through here was LA Guns. That's literally through here. They played a mile away from me, but they were playing that album. Their new album is just like one of their albums from 30 years ago, and it sounds
Right.
really, really good. And the crowd was really, really into it. So they're still a
Right.
push
Yeah.
for that music because it's such great music, and it's a band. You know, it's five,
Right.
six,
Right.
maybe seven people having
Yeah.
a great time up there, not a singer
Yeah,
in an
exactly.
orchestra or an auto tune or any of that.
Yeah,
So it
right.
really is it'd be a treat to see how you handle that duality of this great
Mhm.
arena rock stuff versus something a little bit more, I don't want to say cerebral because that's kind of a turnoff
Yeah.
for most people, but a little bit more depth,
Yes.
you know, and a
Right.
little bit more
Exactly.
of an homage to the Holsworths, the Gilmores, you
Yeah.
know,
And
in the
experimental
past.
and unexpected. You know,
Yeah.
just a little bit that surprise element in there. You know,
Yeah.
like where did
Oh,
this come from? This doesn't
and I
have to be
read,
rock. You know, can be any genre you want in there. You know,
you're
or
right.
no genre, which I prefer.
Exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. I read you and I have a love for Porcupine Tree in common.
Oh yeah. See, that was
Yep,
still a
yep.
group that came out. They came out what in the early '90s, right?
Yes. Mhm,
Yeah.
yep.
And so I got turned on to him by a friend of mine, actually my attorney friend in Seattle, Rob. He turned me on to him, and I just went, "Oh God," you know. And I started listening to him. He's always been into Peter Gabriel and Genesis and all that, and so he likes that kind of prog rock stuff. And he says, "You got to check these guys out." And I did, and I just went, "Oh man." I love Chimera and I love Poem, those two albums, but everything they do pretty much, and Steven
Everything.
Wilson, you know. And then it got me into other groups like Massive Attack and Conjure One and Sigur Rós and all these different bands that are just not the normal type, you know, radio friendly type of people, you know. Now, these bands are much more famous, like Sigur Rós is from Iceland.
Yep.
And so basically, dog's barking to go out there. What's wrong, Mason? Can you wait for a minute?
Is he talking about dogs? I told you we had Mark Volalonga on there last week. We're going to put his video out tomorrow, I think. But he's doing a thing, Canines for Warriors. So we were talking about dogs, and I couldn't resist. This is our newest edition.
Oh, right on. Oh, man.
This is
How cool
Gabby.
was
She's
that?
8 weeks old. Yep. She's
Oh,
a schnoodle.
fantastic.
Yep.
Wow.
And so dogs are
What a
great.
cutie,
Dogs are great.
man.
So
Yeah.
I'm now making it a thing where I'm going to see if I can find a way to put Gabby in every video we do.
You should do it. Definitely.
She's the mascot. She's
Yeah.
she's the official Masters Radio mascot. We'll have to get her a shirt.
Oh, cool.
So,
Awesome.
so when you start
awesome.
talking about your dog, I thought I got to show this off.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, I'm glad you certainly have a lot of plans for the future. We've been speaking with, pardon me, Steve Lynch of Autograph, of the Guitar Institute Technology, of The Right Touch, and most importantly, Confessions of a Rock Guitarist. And this is one of our longest interviews because it took that long to get through the stories that he has.
Oh, God.
It's over
If we were to
200
go-
pages of stories and worth every single one of them to read this book. So get this book because
Thank you so much for that.
you were never going to find. I mean, you can look at things like Almost Famous and several other almost cliche rock and roll diaries. There's nothing with the depth of this.
Thank you for that.
So I encourage you to please check out Confessions of a Rock Guitarist. It has been our pleasure to be with you, Steve. Thank you so much for your time.
All right.
And good luck.
All right. Thank you very much for having me on. I really appreciate it.
You bet. Take
Okay,
care.
Adam.